Something else that I wanted to mention about the just general nature and construction of the flute. So we have the mouthpiece here. This is where the sound happens. These are the finger holes. And right here, these holes are actually the tuned bass note. So that's where the sound is actually coming out, not through the very bottom of the cap. That's super important in the tuning process, as well as all of the holes get tuned by how they get cut. Now, let's talk just a little bit about how you hold it, how you hold and play the flute. Now, you can just totally hold it up here in the air, and that's probably generally recommended, what a lot of people are going to be doing. However, if you're playing for a long period of time, if you're sitting cross-legged on the ground or some other position, sometimes it's nice to put it on your leg. Sometimes, like in this orientation, if say I was cross-legged, I might be putting here on the inside of my leg, or kind of resting on my knee. What I don't want to do is totally close off the flute here on the bottom, because it's really going to prevent how the sound comes out. It's not going to sound very good. If you do that, you kind of just resting it on this back edge lightly on your leg. I don't really need to do it so much on this flute, but on the heavier, bigger drone flutes, that's probably going to be more common. Yeah, so that's kind of just something to keep in mind. Another just tiny little maintenance piece is there can be a good amount of saliva and also just air vapor, moisture from your breath that fills up into the chamber, particularly under this little top block where the air is coming across, and it gets stuck in there a little bit. When you're done playing, especially if you've been playing after for a little while, 5-10 minutes, half an hour for sure, at the end I want you to take the flute and stand up so you don't whack it on the ground, but pretty much as forcefully as you can, give it a good shake. Like that. And it might move your block a tiny bit. Your block should be tight enough that it doesn't have even a hint of possibly coming off. But a lot of moisture is gonna get shot out the end. And after you do that, you can put your mouth into these little spaces and go. You're just trying to clean off any massive excess moisture out of the flute. As well as, if you can, don't immediately put it back in the flute bag and let it air dry. I guess, yeah, something else to keep in mind. Cold temperatures are actually pretty okay for the flutes to exist in. If it's in your cold car, not ideal, especially in really extreme temperatures. But if it gets down to freezing and it's in your car for a day or two, that's fine, no problem. Typically, heat though is the much bigger issue. Do not leave it in your vehicle in the hot summer where it's just roasting and baking. It can break the joints and is really, really hard on instruments in general. Also massive humidity fluctuations, like if you live in the desert and you travel to the Amazon jungle, it's doable and it's sealed in such a way that it should be okay. You just want to be trying to minimize the constant humidity and temperature fluctuations as best you possibly can on a flute. Yes, okay. So let's talk about how you hold it. Now, sometimes when people are first starting, a lot of people are kind of putting it out like this because they want to see. You want to be able to see where your fingers are going, which is natural. But it's actually, if you see like my body position, it's really not so great. You want to be seated. This chair should be a little bit higher, but it's not for filming purposes. So that I have a little bit more, in a nice comfortable position. And having it slightly out from you is just fine, but a lot more vertical than you might think is a much more ergonomic and comfortable way of playing. And in that situation, you're not really going to be able to see the notes, but you learn how to feel them and play by feel, as far as your fingers contacting and covering the notes in the proper fashion. which is a little bit uncomfortable at first, but you'll get the hang of it really, really quickly. Now, with a drone flute, so it's going to be a little bit more straightforward for a single flute, but I'm going to show you on the drone flute. Play whatever is comfortable. I actually play opposite than most people find intuitive. It doesn't really matter. Whatever you just choose and feels good, go with that and stick with it. As far as what I'm talking about, as far as which hand goes on top. I like this orientation. I'm a right-handed person with my right hand on top and my left hand on the bottom. And if you notice, the left hand has to kind of reach over and play these notes on the bottom. You can do it in either fashion. I'm going to show you either fashion. If you notice, I'm not playing with my fingertips. That's a common error that people are making as well. People are trying to play too much with their fingertips, and it's a lot harder to cover a hole. Really, you want to be using the pad, the big, broad surface of your finger to contact and make pressure to easily and fully cover that entire hole. Get a little bit closer here. So not with your fingertips, but really way more with your finger pads. Now, if you notice, in this position, I am not completely straight with the flute, not parallel to the body of the flute. This right hand is in a little bit of this angled orientation. These fingers are coming in at an angle, because if they're this way, well, my middle finger is longer and it has to do this funny awkward bend. If you do this side, then all these fingers get to stay in their nice natural straightness. However, this hand is coming a lot more straight on with the world. Now, if I were to switch it, if you find that to be a little bit more comfortable, well, I'm still basically doing the same thing with my left hand, because just it's how it works by coming kind of across the body of the flute. It's a lot more comfortable. That middle finger is bent a little bit, but it's okay. But now I'm doing that angled situation with my right hand on the bottom. So really whatever's comfortable for you. Now, this is a minor pentatonic scale, so you can play other notes. There's 6 notes, there's 6 holes on this flute. But when we play the standard Native American style scale, which is that sound of the minor pentatonic scale, we're always leaving this hole down. This hole exists because you can play other scales. You can play more complex scales by cross-fingering and more complex things, but we're not going to get into that right now. We're just going to look at the basic structure. So for us right now, let's just plan on always leaving this hole down, and we count from the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the way that we basically play is one finger at a time from the bottom up. So here's the first note, here's the second note, third note, fourth note, leaving this down, fifth note, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sorry. We have this note with all the holes covered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we get back to the octave again. We get back to the same bass note. So this is an F sharp drone, so this is F sharp, and this is F sharp. Yeah, we're not going to talk about the names of the different notes or the relative sounds that they make. But they're going to be the same on any of the flutes that you have. This is the basic way to play. So let's take a look. So the same that you go up is the same way that you come back down, one finger at a time. The sound is essentially leaving the first place that it can, and so it's going to go up in pitch. The shorter the wavelength gets. Now, what's going to happen a lot of the times is you're going to make sounds maybe like this. And you're like, what the heck's going on? And the most common situation is that your fingers, these other fingers besides the hole that you're trying to play, aren't actually covering the note fully, completely. And so the sound is doing all kinds of weird things. So you kind of just go as slow as you need to start being able to practice that scale. Again, using your finger pads, not your fingertips, in a nice solid. And you shouldn't have to push really hard. You really don't need much pressure when you're doing it properly. If you can kind of see these little indents here, I'll push kind of hard. I don't know if you can see that right now, but there's a ring kind of right in the center of my finger pad. And I want you to just practice the scale until it's really familiar to you. And then you can start to play with it. Do whatever you like. So, you know what, let's jump back for a sec. So there's the little bit raised mouthpiece here on this side of the flute, and the slightly lower side of the drone flute. So far, we're only playing the one side, the articulated, the hold, fingered side of the drone flute. And you really are kind of just wrapping your lips in a pretty tight fashion right around the raised side here. Now let's try to play the drone side as well. So if you're playing the bass note, for example, this is the key of F sharp, so this is an F sharp note right here. You're basically rolling your mouth and your head to be able to cover and blow into both sides in an even amount, because you could go too far. Now I'm only playing the drone side. We still need to make sure that we're playing both sides together. And yeah, so let's explore playing the drone and the side together, doing that basic scale again. Yes. So then, once that becomes a little bit more familiar, then we don't have to play in that same order. We can do all kinds of things. Maybe we lift 2 fingers at a time. Just play around with getting a little bit more familiar with that. And then our next video, we're going to jump into more specific techniques on playing concepts to make it a little bit more fun. All right.